Good morning. Welcome to our.
Mic's off.
Good morning. Welcome to our October 3rd, 2023 meeting of the Board for Professional Engineers, Land Surveyors, Geologists. I am Michael Hartley, Board President. I would like to call this meeting to order, and Selena asked for a roll call.
Hartley,
Here.
Vice President Wong,
Here.
Dr. Amistad, Dr. Ascari, Ms. D'Antonio, Ms. Garcia, Mr. King,
Here.
Martinez,
Here.
Ms. Matheson,
Here.
Mr. Rufino, Mr. Sanchez,
Present.
Mr. Villegas.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Excellent. Now it's time for Pledge of Allegiance. Christina, would you do us the honors?
Please rise.
Flag of the United States of America. Republic for one nation, God, indivisible.
Thank you.
So now it's time for public comment for items not on the agenda. This time is designated for public comment on items that are not on the agenda. We have a time limit of 5 minutes per speaker. Later, we will invite public comment on items that are on the agenda. Please be aware that public comment should provide information to the board members. This is not a discussion between the board members and the public. No action can be taken on any particular item at this meeting. I ask that individuals making comments not discuss pending license applications, pending complaints, or pending disciplinary actions that may come before the board for a decision. Those topics should be addressed to board staff outside of this meeting. Would anyone like to address the board on an item that is not on the agenda? Yes, sir.
I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Carl Josephson. For those of you who don't know me, I'm representing Structural Engineers Association of California. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carl. This time I'd like to make an announcement and welcome Christina Garcia, our newest public member.
Mr. President,
Yes.
are we going to address online requests?
Yes. Can you open that up, please?
We are now open for public comment online. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand or type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users may dial *3 to raise a hand. And our first request comes from Dalen Nixon Helms. Hold on just a moment. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone. You'll be given 5 minutes with a 15-second warning.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Wonderful. I don't know if you can see me as well. It doesn't appear that my video is on. But my name is Dylan Nixon Helms. I represent myself as a member of the public and as RRM Design Group as an employee there. And so I just have a few items that I wanted to bring to the attention of the board with the context of improving the licensing process in general. The first one is if there is any possible way to give access to additional reviewers beyond the registrar, and this is for civil engineering specifically. All of these comments are for civil engineering specifically. If there would be a way to allow applicants to discuss questions with the licensed reviewers aside from the registrar, that would be greatly helpful to improving the process. And the second one, this is the most important comment that I believe that I'll make today. But if it is possible to have the board provide examples of what they believe is civil engineering experience in regards to each specific section of the definition of civil engineering, it would be extremely helpful for applicants, and I believe would alleviate a lot of the resubmittals that occur during the application process. specifically the two that come to mind are appraisals or evaluations. Throughout the process of an application, it came to my attention that the board views only experience that can be conducted or done by licensed civil engineers as experience that qualifies for licensure. And there are two sections, appraisals and evaluations, and the coordination of the work of professional, technical, or special consultants. I've discussed this with a variety of individuals, including licensed professionals as civil engineers, and I wasn't able to come up with a single example of an appraisal or an evaluation that can only be done by a licensed civil engineer by law, or the coordination of the work of professional, technical, or special consultants that can only be done by a licensed civil engineer by law. So if the board could provide examples online directly attributing to or associated with the definition of civil engineering as defined by the 2023 Professional Engineers Act, I think that would be extremely helpful. The third one, I understand that there's drawbacks for this. Applicants should have the option to take the state-specific exams in concurrence or directly following the NCES exam. I understand if your application is not approved for whatever reason, you might end up spending money taking these exams and wasting your time if the board doesn't think that you're qualified to become a licensed civil engineer. So there are drawbacks to that, but it would be extremely beneficial. And the last one is, if possible, the board should provide clarification on what within the NCEES exam qualifies as civil engineering. The NCEES exam has a wide breadth of topics that all applicants are tested on that in the eyes of the board does not qualify as civil engineering, such as scheduling and budgeting, project management in general. And so when applicants take this exam and then go to submit their experience, there's a little bit of a disconnect on what actually applies within the eyes of California as civil engineering experience. And so those are the comments that I would like to make. I'll also drop them in the chat in a more succinct version. And I just want to say I sincerely appreciate the opportunity to bring these to the attention of the board. And I realize that this isn't a dialogue, so I will just close it out. And again, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Those are our only requests at the moment.
Do I need to request that you close the?
No, my apologies. That is our only request at the moment.
So can you go ahead and close that out?
Absolutely.
Welcome again, Christina Garcia, our newest public member. And I think legislative is next. Okay.
Hey, this is Nancy Eisler, the Assistant Executive Officer of the Board. So the legislative calendar for the years on page 13 and 14, the session ended September 14th, and the governor has until October 14th to act on legislation. And then we're done for the session. So going on to the bills that the board has been following, we have Assembly Bill 883, which adds a provision to existing law related to, excuse me, expediting the licensure process for an applicant who served as an active duty member of the military or the armed forces and was honorably discharged. This bill would add a provision that if the member was enrolled in the United States Department of Defense Skill Bridge program, they would also qualify for this. The board has had a watch position on this bill. We don't believe it would significantly add to our workload. The bill did pass both houses of the legislature and was enrolled and presented to the governor, and the governor has until October 14th to sign or veto the bill. He has not taken action on it yet at this time. I don't know if you want to ask for any comments from board members or the public after each bill, or
Yes, let's do that. Can you go ahead and open it up for public comment, please? Oh, sorry. Do any board members want to discuss AB 883? Seeing none, can you open it up for public comment, please?
Absolutely. Although recommend that you take public comment from the room before accepting public comment online.
Is there any members of the public who would like to comment on AB 883? Seeing none, would you please open up for public comment online?
We are accepting public comment on AB 883, I think was the number. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping the hand button at the bottom of your screen, or you may type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise a hand. Seeing no requests online, do you wish to continue with the agenda?
Continue with the agenda, please, Nancy.
okay, the next bill is Senate Bill 143. The board had not seen this bill before. It was amended in August to become a budget trailer bill. And there's two provisions in it that affect the board. This bill was signed by the governor September 13th, and it became effective immediately upon signing. One provision would add section 115.10 to the Business and Professions Code. And this section relates to the federal law regarding portability of professional licenses for service members and their spouses. There was federal law that became effective January 1st of 2023 that enables service members and their spouses to essentially register with a state licensing board to practice within that state if they are signed there through military orders, and they do not have to get an actual license issued by that state. And so the federal law provided a few items that the people would need to meet to qualify to do this, but it didn't go into a lot of detail about how that would work or what information we could ask for to verify that they qualified. And so the Department of Consumer Affairs worked with the legislature to add this section that details what information must be provided to us and what some of the terms mean and how we would handle these types of requests. We have not received any requests under this provision. There are still the provisions for military spouses to apply for an actual license that would remain in effect. And so this provides another pathway for service members and spouses to be able to practice if they are assigned here as part of the military orders. And then the other section that the bill adds is section 11133 of the Government Code. This is part of the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act. This section has been in effect before. It's the one that authorizes state entities to hold public meetings through teleconferencing and making those meetings accessible to the public telephonically or otherwise electronically without having to provide a physical location. The section contained a sunset date of July 1, 2023, so it did expire, but this bill adds it back in with a sunset date of December 31, 2023. So I just wanted to bring those two sections to the board's attention since they do affect the board. If anybody has any questions.
Any board comments? Kobe?
Hi, Nancy, it's Kobe. The sunset date is just to the end of this year, correct?
Correct.
And so it really is just kind of a temporary fix between, I guess, when the last one expired and when the governor signed the bill?
Right. So the governor signed this bill September 13th, so it went back into effect then, and it will go through the end of this year, and then Senate Bill 544 that
Right.
we'll talk about
Right.
shortly goes into effect January 1st.
Okay, yep, that's what I was assuming as well. All right, thank you.
Any comments, any further comments from the board? And the public? Any comments? Can we open it up for online, please?
We are accepting online comments for the bills that were just read. If you would like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Or you may type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. Looking around, does not appear we have any requests for comment at the moment. Do you wish to continue with the agenda?
Yes, please. Nancy?
Okay, Senate Bill 372 is the next one. The analysis begins on page 85. This is the bill that would require the board to update licensees' records to include their updated legal name or gender if the person provides evidence that they have had a legal name change or gender change for gender identity or domestic violence issues. The board had a support position on this bill. And since the time of preparing the analysis, the governor did assign this bill. And so it will go into effect January 1st, 2024. Anyone has any questions?
Any comments from the board? Wilfredo?
Yeah, I believe we've spoken about this one a few times, right? And this is the one that we were concerned about the ability of the public to say like, hey, person X used to be called person Y. Is person X still like, how do I tie those things together if I'm trying to look up somebody's disciplinary history? And I'm seeing here that it says something about requiring a statement gets posted. I'm just kind of curious what we envision the process would look like for me to find out that a person with a new name got disciplinary action before, and I'm not aware of the name change.
Yeah, there would be provisions. DCA worked with the author on this to really outline in the bill the process and what information would be disclosed and how it would be disclosed. And essentially what it would be is if they looked up somebody that our records showed we had enforcement action against them, a page would come up that would say, please contact the board for further information. And so then we would go from there with providing them the information about previous disciplinary actions in that case. And so DCA is working on how to implement that through license search.
Okay, and that's a scenario in which I'd look up somebody by their prior name. It would, no?
Or their current name or license number.
Okay,
Because if the disciplinary action was under their former name, but you have their current name, you'd look at up under that, but we would still be able to disclose to you previous disciplinary action. It just wouldn't be posted on the website.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Yes, Kobe.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought this up. So I had two concerns when I read this. One was it'll say contact the board at a minimum, but I'm just wondering, this maybe maybe this is more of a Rick question than a Nancy question. How hard or easy will it be? Does the person who wants to contact the board just call the general number and try to figure out how to get to the right person? How will they get that information? And so there's that set of questions, and maybe you guys are figuring that out, but I certainly would want it to be, I think we all would want that process to be as easy and seamless as possible. But then the other issue is if you're looking up under the former name, will that name still be on the website? And if you are doing so, then you'll get that information, I guess, because that's the way it's done now. But then how will you know? Will there also be a notice, in addition to the disciplinary record actually being available to someone who's looking it up under the prior name, will they be informed somehow that that person has changed their name? And kind of going the other direction as well, if they know this person or they're about to hire this person under their new name and they look up that new name, I mean, I think this is what we were all envisioning would happen, that they look up somebody under the new name and then there's a statement that says, please contact the board for further information. Is Rick, is that kind of how you see it working at this point? I know we have until January to do this.
Trying to make sure I'm remembering everything you actually said there.
I can repeat them.
Oh, that would be fine if you did not do that.
And my call dropped during most of it, so.
I would
Sorry
say
about
generally,
that.
yeah, generally speaking, I think you're correct. I think there's a chance people will know the new name more than the old name. And they'll see, and then they'll be able to be alerted to contact the board. And usually when they're asking for information like this, it will be directed to the enforcement unit for response. If they're coming in with the old name, I think practically speaking, if the person had their name changed through the appropriate process, the old name, you would not be able to find the person in license lookup through the old name any longer at that point. If they had a license number like Nancy mentioned, then they would be able to find it there with a different name. But I think a lot of it is still trying to be worked out at this point, and we're going to really see what DCA advises us as we move forward, because I think this is something that's going to affect quite a few other boards much quicker and sooner than ours. And I think we're going to try to let them take the lead and see what happens.
I think, yeah.
Actually, the bill specifies what to do with if they look up via the former name. It says if a public search of the online license verification system is performed using a licensee's or registrant's former name that was replaced pursuant to subparagraph A, the board shall post an online statement directing the public to contact the board for more information about the licensee or registrant.
All right, well,
Nancy, just to ask that then, would that then mean that the former name would still have to be in license lookup?
Yeah, I would think so, the way that's phrased. I think that's part of what DCA is trying to determine how all of that would work through license search.
Okay.
Because they pull from two different systems to get the data for license search and how those systems handled name changes and maintaining previous names can be problematic. So I know that's part of what they're working on. And then I know I heard at the beginning of your comments, Kobe, you were asking about if they would just call the main phone number for the board. The enforcement unit does have a dedicated phone number and a dedicated email address that we could provide rather than just the main phone number.
Yeah, Nancy, that'd be great to have both a phone number and an email address. That,
Yeah.
that would make it easier. I mean,
Yeah.
just the last thing I would say is, look, I think my colleagues know that I was very supportive of the intent of this bill, and they have made the motion to originally support it, and et cetera. So I'm really glad the bill passed. But I mean, there's got to be a way, if someone feels that they've been wronged under their former name, that they can easily get that information. Because generally, it seems to me that generally someone who's going to be looking up the former name is someone who feels like they've been wronged. Whereas someone who's looking up the new name is a potential new client who wants to check to see if they have a disciplinary record. And in each case, it's really important that they be able to get the information or figure things out.
Sometimes what we see is like with building plans, they're trying to get a hold of the civil or structural engineer who did the plans many years ago, or with land surveying, they're trying to get a hold of the land surveyor who prepared a record map that was done many years ago. So those are also situations where they would likely have the former name as what they're looking up. But they should also have the license numbers in those cases as well, since they'd be off official documents.
Yeah, that's true. All right. Well, presumably this piece of legislation is going to drop off our packet in the future now that it's been signed. But if we could just get an update on this as DCA works through these issues, that would be great.
Yeah, I think it's also something that, maybe once it starts, once they start the program, they might realize there are some changes that might need to be made, and they'll work with the legislature and the board on dealing with that.
Okay. Thank you, Ms.
That
President.
seems to be what happens often.
Christina, did you have a comment?
Yes, I did have a comment. So is part of that process of figuring that out a possibility for like a name alias? So I know, for example, when people have a name change, you can technically still, like, let's say, for example, it was an email. You can still email the old address and it just redirects you to the new person. So is that still a possibility for maybe the old name change when they're searching that name to bring them to the new name? And it could just be, if you have any questions, contact for further details. That can still be a thing, but I think having the name alias might be able to kind of help whenever people are looking for that old name and bringing that to the new name.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different issues. There's just simply looking someone up, but then there's also trying to determine if they've had previous enforcement action taken against their license. And so I think the plan seems to be that, if there had been other enforcement action taken, then that would be where the directive to contact the board would be. But if they were looked up by a previous name, it would likely show the new information. But I think that's something they're still trying to determine, because the objective is to not tie the former name to the person any longer, as much as possible, but still providing the board the ability to provide that consumer protection of being able to disclose information that may have been under the previous name. So that's something they're still working out too.
If I could add to
But I
that,
mean, the
some of
way it currently works, yeah, if somebody gives us a name change, the old name is still in the system for a while. So
to add to that, some of the concerns earlier on in this bill process weren't so much about being able to route the name change as much as it is historical legal documents that had the old name on it. How do we deal with that? And that was really the majority of the concerns. And so I like your idea about the alias, and I wouldn't be surprised if OIS is going to be working that into the system somehow. But it's the document I think is the most concern.
Wilfredo?
I think Nancy may have answers, but I kind of dawns on me, I should have asked this last time, but like, I'm kind of curious how the process works today. If I used to be Joe and now I'm Bill, and I look up, Bill Sanchez or whatever, and do all of the documents pertaining to be come up when I look for the new name, or do I have to search for both names today in order to get all the documents I'm looking for?
You hear that? I'm going to attempt until she jumps in and interrupts me. No, as soon as the name change goes through, if we receive a official request to change the name of the system, we do retain the old names in the system for a certain period of time, like Nancy was saying, just for us for historical purposes. But as soon as that name is changed, anything associated with that document wise would show up in license lookup, because it's really assigned to the license number, not necessarily the name. The name is an attribute of the license number in some respects.
Okay, and then what you were saying was challenging is when I actually look at the actual document, it'll still say whatever the original text said in it, which will include old names and so on. Okay.
Exactly. That was the concern.
yeah, sorry, my call keeps getting dropped. So did you answer correctly since I didn't hear you, Rick?
Let's assume I did, and you just could be very happy about that.
We're all quite tickled.
Tiffany is not jumping up and down her seat, so we're good.
Okay.
And any other board comments? How about from the public? Online?
We are now accepting public comment online. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. You may also type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise a hand. We're going to look around for just a few seconds to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request online, do you wish to continue with the agenda?
Yes, please.
Okay, the next bill is Senate Bill 447. I brought this bill to the board's attention previously, not for the board to take any action on it, but because it would repeal the section of the government code that banned travel to certain states. The governor signed this bill September 13th. It contained an urgency clause, so it has gone into effect already. And so section 11139.8 of the government code has now been repealed, and there are no longer prohibitions against traveling to certain states. The Department of Consumer Affairs is working with the governor's office and various other departments on what the boards can do about resubmitting out-of-state travel requests, if any of them were to any of the banned states. And so we're waiting for further direction on that.
Any board comments? public comment? Online?
We are once again open for online comment. If you'd like to make a comment, raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. You may also type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise a hand. Looking around, there are no requests for public comment online.
Next one, Nancy.
Okay, the next bill is Senate Bill 544. This is the one that deals with the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act and teleconferencing. The board had changed its position to watch at the July meeting due to concerns with the rumored amendments that were being made, and there were quite a few amendments after that that I didn't believe would affect the board's position of watch on this bill. The governor has signed this bill, and it will go into effect January 1, 2024. It's kind of confusing. ECA had a whole meeting explaining it to us, and we were all still trying to figure it out. So under the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act, the board can hold an in-person meeting. Everyone is there in one location. Members of the public are there in one location. There is no remote call-in option. Under the new provisions, that's still allowed. There's also the more traditional teleconferencing process where the board members can be in different locations throughout the state, but each location must be noticed and open to the public and accessible, and the public has to be able to hear and participate in the meeting at each of those locations. And there is no remote call-in option in that case. And that still would be an option under the new law. What the new law does is it adds a provision for remote meetings, but it requires that a majority of the board be physically present in one location. And then any members above that majority can call in or video WebEx in from remote locations that do not have to be listed on the notice and do not have to be open to the public. And the one physical location where the majority of the board members are must be open to the public. Public must be able to participate in the meeting from there. There also has to be a remote option for the public where they could call in to participate in the meeting that way. The board members who are participating remotely would have to be on video for the meeting unless they had technical difficulties, such as sometimes broadband issues will be affecting video abilities. There's provisions about how to deal with that. There's provisions if a board member has a disability that prevents them from traveling to the physical location, that they could still count towards that majority, even if they were not physically present there. But information has to be disclosed about it. So DCA is trying to determine how much information would have to be disclosed about the reason the member couldn't attend the meeting, because it does involve private health-related matters. And then, excuse me, there are provisions about, if the remote option, if there's technical difficulties that cannot be restored, then the entire meeting has to be canceled and ended. So in my opinion, it doesn't really help if we have an issue with a quorum, because you still have to have a quorum present in the physical location. It does still provide for the public the remote option, if we choose to, have this type of meeting. So that's why I felt like the board should just maintain its watch position on this. The other thing the bill does is for advisory bodies to the state body. So if we had any standing committees, advisory committees, or any committees, there would be a provision that would allow the committee members to all participate remotely with their locations not having to be disclosed to the public. There would have to be a physical location, and a staff member would have to be present at that physical location. And the public would have to be able to attend and participate in the meeting at the remote or at the physical location, as well as also having a remote option. And so if the board were ever to have committees again, that would be a possibility for how we could conduct those meetings. So this will go into effect January 1st, and we'll see if we ever have a need to have a meeting like this. Or if it's just, everybody has to be in one physical location, or we have the old type of teleconferencing meeting. So if anybody has any questions on that.
Any comments from the board members? Wilfredo?
Thanks, Nancy. I agree this is a bit of an improvement. There's 1 or 2 meetings a year where I can't attend, and this will allow me to participate. I guess I'll just reiterate, it's pretty disappointing that it doesn't solve the quorum problem, because I apologize for the last meeting where I had to skip out at the last minute. And it would have been nice if I could have just dialed in and solved the quorum problem that way. So hope the legislature looks at that again.
Your name as an example. We appreciate you speaking about it.
But I imagine
Yeah,
there's cost involved in all that rejiggering and obviously your time. So it's unfortunate that they missed the opportunity to fix that.
Yeah, there was a lot. There were a lot of op-ed columns in various newspapers. They all kind of read about the same. Where they're talking about, like the Public Utility Commission and the Coastal Commission, they should always have to meet in public and, with the public physically present. But little boards like, who cares about barbers or structural tests? And they can do whatever they want. And it was kind of like, well, good, let us do that. But, the legislature didn't go along with those op-ed pieces. So it is one of those things where the Bagley Keene Open Meeting Act applies to almost every state entity. And really the only time where there's a lot of specific exceptions is for the closed session items. And so I can understand them not wanting to go, well, the boards under the Department of Consumer Affairs can do this, but other ones can't, or, I can understand them just wanting it to be one thing for everybody. But yeah, most of the boards aren't real thrilled with it. Doesn't solve a lot of our problems, or like with quorums, as you said, it doesn't help us save money because the majority of board members would still have to travel to a physical location. But on the other hand, it does provide the ability for the public to participate remotely, and that is a good thing. So.
Yeah. I just want to add one more. If this comes up again, just something to consider. Like, there is a drawback to barely eking by with, you've almost got quorum, you've got one person remote, which is if that person's connectivity goes poof during the middle of a meeting, you've suddenly lost your quorum, and you've gone through all the bother of getting everybody to look. So like, it's just a thing to think about. Like, if we do eventually get to a place where we can do that, is to consider, like, maybe you want to at least exceed quorum by an extra person so that if that happens, you're not, eating the cost of hosting a meeting and canceling it at the last minute.
Christina?
So I guess that for me, it's just trying to clarify that new requirement about visibility on camera. So because there's the word must, and so it's kind of tag along with a concern with what Will said. If, let's say, that the person has to be visible, it means that, that you will have to have a good connection. And so the telephone participation use a lot less, bandwidth, and compared to you have to have, video, so I'm just wondering whether that becomes more like a hindrance and, the potential effect on the quorum issue, the, whatever else. And then also whether it applies to the board members and also the public. So Nancy, can you just maybe help me clarify that?
There's no provision that would require the public to be on video.
That's
There
good
are
to know.
provisions that address what would happen if the member lost the video. But it's more like, if you have to start out being on video, and then if you have technical issues, what can be done? It says the visual appearance of a member on camera may cease only when the appearance would be technologically impracticable, including but not limited to when the member experiences the lack of reliable broadband or internet connectivity that would be remedied by joining without video, or when the visual display of meeting materials, information, or speakers on the internet or other online platform requires the visual appearance of a member on camera to cease. So for that second part, that would be if we were showing like a PowerPoint presentation, or that sometimes with some of the online systems that will take over and block all of the cameras for the people. So if you just have your presentation on the screen and everybody else is blocked, that's still okay. So, and those are just examples that they added into the law. And they also, it says if the member does not appear on camera due to challenges with internet connectivity, they have to announce their reason when they turn off their camera.
Thanks, Nancy. You answered my questions.
Before the pandemic, there was no provision for calling in. This is all new since COVID. My personal opinion is, yeah, it would be nice to solve the quorum problem, but I think if it's if what you want to discuss is important enough to bring to the board, you need to bring it to the board. You need to be here in person. So on the one hand, yes, it opens it up to a lot more participation, but I mean, to me, it's much more meaningful for someone to be here in person, present themselves and their topic. So my 2 cents.
Nancy, this is Wilfredo again. Do you have a sense of what the motivation is for the whole video visibility thing? Because I'm just kind of curious about that, and whether it's inappropriate for me to like hide under the desk here for the rest of the meeting.
Pajamas on.
What I've heard is that one of the other provisions that it requires is if you're on video, you have to disclose if there's anyone with you who's over 18. And from what I've heard, the concern is that there would be other people there, you know, like whispering in your ear how to vote on things. And as some people say, well, that's also possible through text messaging or email without the person even being there. So I think a lot of this was compromise with all the different interest groups for all the different types of state bodies that follow this for their meetings, as to how it could work. So
Nancy, this is Rick. I have a question for you. If you could clarify, you may be able to clarify this. If we have a situation where we have, let's say, 8 board members in one location physically, and we have remote access for the public, and we have 2 board members that are participating remotely, is it just those 2 board members participating remotely that I have to have video on? Or do we also have to have video on for the 8 board members that are physically present in the room?
I'm looking at what the law says. It says the members of the state body shall visibly appear on camera during the open portion of a meeting that is publicly accessible via the internet or other online platform, except as provided with the sections we've talked about with issues with the broadband or how the display works. So to me, that sounds like even all the ones physically present
That's
would
interesting.
have to
It's a new
be.
requirement.
Yeah, just I have concerns with
I-
situations where, first of all, I think we should make, whatever we can do to make ourselves accessible to the public. But we may have, if we have board members in multiple locations, we may have situations where the location where the majority is at and physically may not have the best internet access. I don't know. We have to figure that out.
Yeah, and I mean it's like today's meeting. You know, board members could have called in since we have a quorum there physically present. The camera operator is doing a good job of, you know, switching the camera to whichever person is talking so I can see who's talking, even though you're all doing a good job telling me who it is. So it is one of those things where I think we'd have to be very cognizant of where the physical location would be and whether it could handle the remote meeting option, as we've done. You know, when we've gone to out of town places, we really haven't done the remote option because that's difficult to find a place out of town that can accommodate that.
Any other board comments?
One, looking at the language, I just noticed that anyone who participates remotely, the public has to be informed of that. So a new notice of the kind that we all get about the official notice of the meeting, whoever is going to be participating remotely is going to have to be named in a notice that goes out no later than 24 hours prior to the meeting. So be aware of that. My question is, does the board get to choose which of the options like if the board doesn't want to do remote option for, even assuming we have a quorum physically present, if the board doesn't want to allow people who aren't here to participate, can the board do that under the law? Or does this bill make it mandatory that if we have a quorum in the room, that people can participate remotely? Which of
No.
that is?
It doesn't require that. The board could still hold a physical location only meeting where nobody calls in. All the board members are there, staff would be there, members of the public would have to come to that physical location, and there would be no remote call-in option at all. Just the old traditional board meeting.
Last question on that. Could you do both? Board members must show up physically, no remote participation, but the public could participate remotely?
You could, but then that pulls in the provisions of what happens if you have problems with the remote connection. If the remote connection goes down and you can't restore it, then the meeting has to terminate because you've noticed it as a remote virtual option meeting. So even though there would still be a quorum present, and public could still come to that physical location, we'd have to stop the meeting if the remote option failed.
Okay, thank you.
Which is why we don't do it that way in locations where we're not certain that we have the technology. Any other board comments? Members of the public? Can we open it up for online comments, please?
We are open for online comments. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. You may also type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise a hand. And we will call on people in the order we have requests. And it looks like we have a couple of requests. Our first request comes from Jack. Jack, it does not look like you have a microphone connected. Hold on just a moment. I'm going to pull up an audio slide, and we're going to move on to Dylan Nixon Helms. Hold on just a moment, please. Oh, Jack is back with a microphone. And Jack is gone. Dylan, you're going to get an opportunity first, and hopefully Jack will reconnect.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. So I just wanted to tag on to the comment that, yes, I do wholeheartedly agree that if you are able to, it is absolutely best to come in person and make your comments. That was 100% my intention today. And I realized the comment wasn't made specifically for me. However, I had a project schedule get accelerated and a client make a request for site visits. And as a professional and a member of the public, I think it's extremely valuable to have both options to come in person and participate online. Because if I didn't have the opportunity to participate online, I'd have to choose between meeting the client deadline and making the comments that I believe are absolutely important to bring to the attention of the board, as well as participate in this meeting and see how the board conducts things and the types of legislation that are being addressed. So as a member of the public and also soon to be hopefully licensed professional myself, I think it's extremely helpful to have the option to participate online for whatever that is worth. Thank you. Oh, also, actually, I don't know if there's a way for me to turn my video on or to be seen. So if there was a way for the members of the public to provide video, I would definitely use it, but it doesn't look like that's an option right now. So just making a comment on that too. Thank you.
This is the moderator. Video is disabled for attendees.
How about Jack?
Let's move on to Jack. Hold on just a moment. Jack, we're sending you a request to unmute your microphone. Looks like you're on a mobile device. You may need to switch to the main screen in order to see the request to unmute your microphone.
I made this connection by error.
All right. So no comment then?
That's correct.
All right. Thank you so much. And it looks like we're all set online. Do you wish to continue with the agenda?
Yes, please. Budget report?
Is this mic on? Oh, good. Hi, my name is Dawn Hall. I'm the Administrative Services Unit Manager, and I'm here to give you the financial report and the budget update. You can see that it starts in your board materials on page 121. And we have the FM13 results for the prior fiscal year. The revenue starts on page 123. We're reporting higher revenues than projected. We've been conservative in our revenue projections. The increase in the volume of initial applications and exam applications has contributed to being over the budgeted or projected revenue. The expenses are outlined on page 124, and the fund condition is on page 126. Does anyone have any questions?
Bill?
Yeah, I had one question on page, you can go to page 122. So I was looking at the printing expense. I see that's doubled. I'm just curious how that happened.
So there have been a number of changes in the print vendors. The print contracts usually run between 4 and 5 years, but they've had to recompete those contracts. And so we have seen a significant increase in the printing expenses.
Okay.
Phil, this is Rick. Are you
yes.
talking about the actual expenditures on page 124 or?
122, Rick.
122 is an example page. It's
Oh,
a
is that
guide
what
on
that
how to
is?
Read that.
Gotcha.
So 126 has the
The
actual
actual
printing
report.
expenses.
Gotcha. That just caught my eye.
It would me too. Those are old numbers.
Okay, no worries.
But we have noticed an increase in printing expenses. So
So,
Thank you for your
given the inflationary environment we're in, are we projecting numbers that will be a lot different in the next couple of years? As you know, gasoline prices and et cetera have gone up. Have we taken into account inflation?
the specific to printing expenses, they're in a contract.
Mhm.
And so we project based on the volume of printing that we anticipate doing at the contract prices.
Okay.
And so that does vary and change. As the contracts change, sometimes that's mid-year. And so that will have an impact on a change in our projection.
Mhm.
And sometimes there's overlap in the billing between the contractors. So we know that EDD had the print contract a number of years ago. They were always very behind in their billing. So we had some bills that were from the old contract and the new contract in prior fiscal years. And there will probably be some overlap between the current contractor and the new contractor.
So as far as paperless communication, will printing still be a part of doing business as a board with the state and et cetera, and the public.
We're aggressively pursuing some ideas and options
Mhm.
to reduce the amount of printing that we do. And
Mhm.
we'll have some more proposals for the board shortly. But yes,
Okay, great. Thank you.
Christina.
Hi, Don. So quick question about the fund condition. So 126.
Mhm.
So we are in 22, well, the 22-23 is done and we're already entering into 23-24. So for the next year cycle, the negative 0.5, the negative 0.5, what will be the possibility that that number would change in the future? Change from negative to positive?
so the revenue projected in that fund condition is based on prior year projections, and we've updated the projections. So we're actually projecting higher revenue for the current year, which will be reflected in the next, at their next board meeting in the materials. So that will have a positive impact on the fund condition and should change that number once we get the new projections approved. And then they'll also be included in the governor's e-budget in January.
Thank you. That's important to clarify before we're freaking out, right?
I'm not sure who was next. Guillermo?
Hi, quick question. Still fairly new to the board, so I'm still trying to wrap my head around budgets and whatnot. So there's some items on here that are overspent percentage-wise. I'm wondering, how does that work at the end of the year? Is it just reconciled between different items, or is there a different process for that?
I'm sorry, I don't think I understand your
So,
question.
so for instance, 5150 staff benefits is 108%, so it's over 100%. So how do you reconcile that at the end of the year? Do you just move money between the different items on page 124, or is there a different process to get that over expenditure?
So we're allocated we're delegated a budgetary amount, and we didn't overspend the total budget amount. And so that is over the projection, but it gets distributed or allocated to the expenses. And so we're not over the governor's budget or what our delegated spending authority is.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
If I could add a little bit to that, the expenses are broken out in the manner in which they are for us internally and DCA budgets internally to track what we're doing based upon what we believe we should be doing. But as Don said, it's really the bottom line. So moving things around between those line items, it's free for us to do that. We just try to monitor this as much in detail as we can.
Betsy?
Thank you. On page 123, bottom, the last line, revenue in advance. I'm sure this has been explained before, but is revenue in advance in a single category, such as renewal fees, or is it all types of revenue that falls into the revenue in advance sum?
It's specific to the renewal fees.
Okay, thank you. And on page 126, the biggest highlighted section. I know renewal fees have alternating high and low years. Do these other categories, delinquent fees, other regulatory fees, other regulatory licenses and permits, do those also have alternating high and low years? Because it looks as if they do if you compare column 2, the highlighted one, with the last column.
We don't have an easy way to make projections for those because it's just based on usually applicant volumes or when licensees who might have a delinquent license decide to renew their license and pay the delinquency fees. So it's not, it doesn't have the same cycle and it doesn't have the same predictability that the renewal fees do. So we know a licensee's expiration date and how many licensees are expected to or due to renew their licenses by their expiration period. But the other categories are just based on initial application volumes or examination application volumes and when licensees might decide to renew a delinquent license.
Okay, so the apparent high and low years on this page is just because there's no better estimate?
Right, there's been a lot of volatility in the volumes recently.
Mhm.
And so this is, the delinquent fees are going to be a little more aligned to the renewal cycles.
Ah.
So as we have more licensees who renew in a certain period, we're projecting higher delinquency fees for that. But the other categories, we're just taking 5-year averages.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
I saw Phil, but I know Kobe, you have a comment too. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I just had a really, really quick question on the same page. Dawn, I see in the months in reserve fund balance, it looks like it's declining and we don't have any months in reserve for the 24-25 fiscal year. Is that just speculation or is that actual?
The fund balance and the months in reserve have been declining. Those are actual results. And if you look back over time, you can see the change and decrease in the overall fund balance. The budget year +1 numbers are projections. And again, the projection for 23-24, the revenue projections will change and be higher in the next set of board materials as the new revenue projections are approved and published with e-budget. So that will have, again, a positive impact on the overall fund condition and the months in reserve.
Great, thank you.
Mr. King?
Thank you, Mr. President. Dawn, isn't it true, though, that we've been told repeatedly over the years that one of the reasons that the out years look bad is because they include encumbrances on the expense side that generally don't pan out or generally don't get completely used up. And so our expenses are generally lower than what is listed in the out year budget. Is that still the case?
Typically, we don't expend expend to the full delegated authority. It's between 85 and 90% of our budgeted delegated authority that we spend. The budget and some of our projections do include encumbrances. And it is true, there are encumbrances that will come back to us for contracts that have expired and weren't fully paid out. But those come back to us as adjustments to our beginning balance. Does that answer your question? There are.
Yes, but at the end of the day, what that also means is that the fund balance goes up, does it not?
When that does get reconciled and come back to us.
Right. Because we've
As an adjustment.
had negative fund balances projected for out years for the last number of years. And as Rick has explained to us repeatedly, don't worry about that because we're actually not going to spend that much.
Right. We don't spend to the full
Right.
Delegated authority. Again, it's 85 to 90% of what the governor's budget is. The other thing, that as the revenues are over our projections, which are very conservative for revenue, that has a positive impact on the fund balance too. And so we closely monitor that. We're working with DCA budgets on a monthly and quarterly basis to review that. They don't have any concerns with the overall fund balance and the months in reserve at this time.
Great. And my other question is, for the sake of me and for the sake of everyone else, could you remind us what FM 13 means?
That's the final closeout period for fiscal when they reconcile all the expenses and revenue. So there's 12 months in the fiscal year, and then they have another period where they send us the final numbers after they've closed it out. So FM 13 just means that that fiscal year is the closeout month. So these numbers should be final.
Thank you.
If I could help to clarify some things, especially for new board members that we have here, we traditionally carry over about 10 to 15% that we do not spend every year. And there's no reason for us, we're not seeing anything that's going to change that. As Don mentioned, we're trying to be very conservative in our revenue because of the volatility of the last few years. It's been difficult to project it in the way we used to. So we've taken upon our approach that let's look over the average of the last 5 years and approach it from that point of view. But that's why once you start seeing budget year +1, you're not seeing the carryover of the 10 to 15% we don't spend at that point, if that helps.
Betsy?
Thank you. I was going to ask a months in reserve question. I decided it had been covered adequately, but I was wondering last night whether if we charted months in reserve, month by month, year by year by year, would the worst looking months in reserve and the board freaking out month always be at the end of a fiscal year or the start of a fiscal year, the worst case view? And then does it start to improve as the year goes on and the board starts to relax, the months in reserve improves, and then when we see the end of the year, it looks bad again? Is it cyclical like that because of the projections and comparison with the total budget becoming closer and closer, well, more realistic as the year goes by?
I don't know. My experience with the board in presenting the financial statements and fund condition to the board is that budget year +1 and even farther out, the months in reserve do look different. You have seen a reduction in the fund condition because of expenses like BMC1, that the board funded that. So there was a greater reserve in prior fiscal periods. So this is new, I think, in terms of in the last 5 years to see the fund condition kind of even out. In terms of the board sentiment about the months in reserves, I don't know how to assess or evaluate that for you. I do take questions, I think, at every board meeting that I'm participating in about the fund condition and the months in reserve in budget year +1 and beyond.
Thank you.
If I could also add to that one too, it used to be, and maybe Kobe remembers, but it used to be in our board meeting packets, we would show budget year +1, +2, +3, +4. And I used to refer to that facetiously as lie +3, lie +4, lie +5, because it was so far out, we never knew what was going to happen. I only pay attention to that right-hand column when you guys ask questions at a board meeting. Other than that, I totally ignore that because it doesn't mean anything to me. Things could change pretty dramatically. Internally, we track it much further out because us and DCA, we have to, but there's so much that can change. So Personally, I would recommend everyone pay attention more to the current year and the budget year. Board meeting 23-24, and then you'll see budget year 24-25. That will be, now you can pay attention to it. And you'll see a change, as Don mentioned, that negative 0.5 will not be negative 0.5 at that point, if that helps at all.
So Rick, in that sense, will we see another possible negative when we come to budget 25, 26?
Yes, because you will not see the unencumbered funds yet from the previous 2 years. You will not see what we normally don't spend at 10 to 15%. So it's always reflects that situation based on really the governor's appropriation for us, more so than actual expenditures being applied.
Right. Well, because of the carryover that you talked about, that
Correct.
always is, one items that will really influence the fund condition.
Correct.
So maybe that would be a reminder for myself and education for the new board members. So what about the ideal number of the fund condition? So is it like 2, 1.5, or what is that?
As far as months in reserve, it used to be that it has changed over time. In the time I've been at the board, it used to be that everyone wanted us to look at 6 months in reserve. Then it was 3 months in reserve. There's no real number being dictated to us now, but we're all trying to maintain about a 3 months in reserve. It's been more realistic, as Don has mentioned, the last few years being our expenditures on the new online Connect system, that we're in the 2 to 3 months range in reserve. So that's where we're trying to maintain. That's really the realistic number at this point. Does that sound good, Don?
Yes, there is, we can only have up to a 24 months in reserve, and then we have to look at adjusting fees and maybe refunding some fees. But so we can have up to 24 months, but most boards probably, try to have 2 to 3 months, and maybe up to 6 months. But the balance of that is, fees that we charge to licensees and applicants. And so the board, I believe the board is well managed. DCA has been happy with our reports and understands that we don't spend to the delegated authority, and that the revenues have just been very volatile. And my projections for revenues are very conservative because of the time that we're in. We saw, a real decrease in volumes for applications and revenue in months around the pandemic. And then it's been unprecedented, the high volume of applications that we've had. So it's hard to predict that that's going to continue, which is why I tend to be conservative with the revenue projections. And again, the fund condition that you see, the budget year, which is our current year, 23-24, those revenue projections are higher. So the next fund condition that you see will show higher revenue projections for that year, and that will have a positive impact on the fund condition in the months in reserve.
Yeah, for those of you in private practice, it does seem counterintuitive to not have more savings, so to speak. It's something that all of us have had to adjust to. But as Don mentioned here, if we started having too many months of reserve, to us, that's the same thing as having not enough months in reserve. We would still have to look at a possibility of a fee change. And if that ever happens, that's great. But to us, it's maintaining our budget, and we look at what we don't spend, and we're very careful about where we need to spend. Absolutely, we weigh that before we do anything to really kind of disrupt that cycle because of the way our revenue trends are. And bless you. And as Don mentioned, it's even though we're seeing historical application trends, over the last year and a half. We're also now starting to see those starting to decline a little bit and not be as high as they were. So we're waiting to see how this all pans out. But yeah, we don't want a lot of months in reserve, and we don't want too few months in reserve either.
Any other board comments? How about from the public? And online?
We are now accepting public comment online. If you'd like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, or better yet, tap that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand. We will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to continue with the agenda?
I have been asked to have a 10-minute break. So
Thank you, Don.
we will reconvene with enforcement at 10:36.
Hey, Mike, if I may, when we reconvene, due to Nancy's availability, or lack of availability this afternoon, could we move to item 9 when we reconvene about the sunset review?
That's a good idea. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right. Who are we?
Good job, boss.
Oh. Waiting for one more.
Is this on the agenda?
It was given to us, given to Rick yesterday.
Okay,
So-
so it's not on our.
No.
Okay.
I'm not sure what consideration we give it actually. Okay, we are back. And Nancy, I think we're going to move to item 9. Talk about sunset review.
Yeah. Thank you for taking it out of order. So we're, the managers and staff are working on preparing the report. We're on track. Our plan is still to have the final draft for the November board meeting for the board to approve. But we did want to suggest that just in case something were to come up that would need more changes, then we could really discuss at that meeting. If we could schedule a meeting in December, we would do it via remote only, since that law is back in effect till the end of December. So nobody would need to travel to the meeting, and you could just connect in from a remote location. And we would suggest trying to schedule it for December 14th or 15th, if we can get a quorum of the board to hold one of those dates or both those dates for now. We will know at the November meeting whether we'll need to hold a meeting in December, but we thought it would be good to ask you to put that on your calendar right now. And so we could see if those dates would work, just in case we do need to have a meeting.
And also, at this time, we would only be expecting that would be our discussion. There would be, public comment, pledge, and then discuss the sunset report draft, see if there's any minor, or any final changes to it and get your approval on it. That really the focus of that's the approval. The only other thing that could change between now and then, being that it's kind of a downtime in legislation, is there may be something enforcement related that Tiffany would have to have dealt with. So we may have a closed session, but really the focus would be just a discussion and approval of the final sunset report. So it would not be an all-day thing. It probably would not even be a 3 to 4 hour thing. It may only be a 2 to 3 hour at the most. That's what I would estimate to set aside about 2 to 3 hours. Which also lends that we could even schedule it for the morning or the afternoon too, on either of those days. It's something to keep in mind. But if all of you were in agreement that we could set aside 14th and 15th or only one day, let's see, make sure that we can set aside that. And then, like she said, by the November meeting, when you guys are reviewing the draft at that point and we see how many revisions we have and things like that, then we'll all pretty much know whether we need to meet in December or not.
So are you asking us to approve December 14th and or 15th as a meeting now?
If you can, if it's possible now, if you could commit to it, that would be great.
Any comments from board members?
I would suggest to maybe take a vote on either 14th or the 15th to see the availability of the board members, and then we can pencil it down for the staff.
Can we do a show of hands? Who's available on December 14th for a meeting? How about 15th. Kobe, did you?
I have some availability on the 14th. The 15th was really bad for me.
Okay. It looked like we had 14th again. I'm sorry.
I could do the afternoon of the 14th.
You can. Sounds like we are approving a December 14th PM afternoon slot.
Okay,
So
if it's okay with you, we'll assume an afternoon on the 14th and a morning on the 15th as a backup. Because there's a couple other board members that are not here that would love to check with them too.
Sure.
And this being sunset, this is one of the things that come to you as meeting materials. They'll be posted on the website, so everyone will have an opportunity to look at it. But the more board members that have the opportunity to discuss it at the meeting, this is one of those times it's important.
Okay. We don't need any public in-person or online comment regarding this, do we?
It doesn't hurt to have it.
By the way, I was looking at November. I'm fine on both those days in December.
So why don't we go ahead and set aside for
Christmas is December 25th.
Thank you.
I made the same mistake.
If you show up at my house on November 25th no.
Oh, well, Fredo, you did the same thing? Yeah.
I can do both.
Okay, so we'll see what we can do, but it sounds like for the most part, everyone is available. We'll send out an email reminder about that after this meeting, just to make sure, especially for the board members who are not here. And like I said, it's kind of a tentative thing at this point, but we would have to make that decision and have time to notice it.
Very well. Any public comment? Any online public comment?
We are now accepting public comment online. If you'd like to make a comment, raise that hand by tapping the hand button at the bottom of your screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise your hand. People may also type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Let's take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment.
So should we finish item 9?
Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to continue?
Nancy, do you want to continue with the
Yeah.
sunset?
So there's a section in the sunset where we can talk about new issues. And throughout the report where we talk about, there's a section on the board history, licensing, that includes examinations, fiscal and staff, enforcement, public outreach, and sections like that. We can be talking about new issues that are coming up that the board may be looking at in the future. But then there's a section where we can specifically highlight them. And sometimes they're ones where we want to ask the legislature, the sunset committees, to include language and legislation in the sunset bill for certain things. Other times, we just want them to know things that the board is talking about, looking at. It kind of puts it out there in case in a future year we want to bring it up. And so the two new issues that that the managers have thought of are the continuing education, that's part of the strategic plan, objective 1.3, talking about what that working group is doing, what we're looking at, why the board is looking at this. Not that we're going to be asking for any action to be taken by the legislature at this time, but just that we're letting them know that that's something we're working on and we may come to them in the future about it. And then the other issue relates to being able to use work experience in lieu of education for certification or licensure a geologist in training, a professional geologist, or a professional geophysicist. We've gone through changes in statute and changes in regulation to try and clarify the educational requirement. We still feel like we're seeing people who, because maybe they didn't take one class, aren't able to qualify for licensure, or because our regulation says they needed 5 units and they took 4 units. And so it's making it difficult. You know, we have to tell people, well, you have to go back and complete more coursework. And sometimes the people have a lot of years of work experience, and we're wondering if there would be some way we could craft it where they could combine the work experience with the education to qualify. That's similar to what engineers and land surveyors can do. But it's something that we need to do more study of. We need to look into it more, see how prevalent this is and what we could come up with. And so we would just be letting the legislature know that we're looking at this for the future and possibly may need legislation in a future time frame for that. We don't have any other new issues that we feel need to be addressed. We will be seeing if there's just corrections, non-substantive changes that we need to make to any of our acts. That's another item we could include. We have been doing that over the past several years, so that might not necessarily be any for us to do, but that would be the only other new issue we would include.
So those are the items that we've identified from the staff management perspective of new issues that we feel that we would mention in the sunset that we're working on. It's open for the board if the board feels there should be something that we should be discussing in addition to those or instead of those. So I just wanted to kind of close with that and see if there's anything the board wishes to add to that.
Any board comments? Any public comments? There's only one chair.
Percent participation from the public in the room.
Rob McMillan, California Land Surveyors Association. Good morning. It's been a while since I've looked at, I believe, 8741 on licensing, but with the changes coming from NCWS for the professional land surveyor exam, the PS exam, into a modularization format, there may be some issues related to legislation to clarify things, no?
So to our knowledge, that wouldn't require any statutory change. But thanks for bringing that up, Rob. Appreciate it.
I know that one of the things the Structural Engineers Association has been advocating for quite a while is, I'm Carl Josephson, Structural Engineers Association of California. Thank you. One of the things the Structural Engineers Association has been advocating for quite a while is the expansion of the type of structures that would be required to be designed by structural engineers. All of the rest of the West Coast, from Alaska, Washington, Oregon, not California, Utah, and a number of other states now require that what they call significant structures be designed by structural engineers. That's particularly true in the high seismic areas. And so one of the things that we would like to see become an important focus for this board and for structural engineers is they'd be required to be a structural design engineer to design those types of buildings. It's a trend across the United States, even Oklahoma and Georgia has gone that route. It's just something to consider. So I don't expect that to necessarily be in the sunset report. It was discussed at the last sunset hearing to the board. And the committee at that time asked the board to take a look at that, which they did. But I think it warrants revisiting. Thank you.
Appreciate you bringing that up too, Carl. Mike, in addition to public comment, I put a letter on in front of each of the board members and also at the front desk. This is public comment from jointly from ACEC and CELSA related to Sunset that they provided to me late yesterday afternoon. It's a letter to the two chairs associated with the Assembly and the Senate, and they CC'd us, as typically these professional associations do. They maintain constant communication with us. So this is public comment on some consideration that the board may want to think about as it moves forward. So it's really a consideration to the committee chairs for the Sunset, but it's also for the board to consider too.
Okay. Yeah.
We should check public comment unless board members have anything else to talk about. Online public
Yes.
comment.
So can I say something? So Rick, in that sense now, because we do have that letter from the public, so what will be the next step? Will the staff discuss it, or do you need the recommendation from the board members, or what should we do?
Well, this is a situation where it's not a board sponsored bill. It's the committee's bill. And so anyone from the public, these organizations, they could talk to the committees when this bill comes out and ask to have something considered. These professional organizations, since they have such a very open communication relationship with this board, they always like to communicate with us and let us know. And they want to hear feedback from us in the future if there's anything to talk about. It doesn't necessarily mean that the board needs to address it, but if this board decides this is something they would like to discuss under the sunset item or even separately, and if at the next agenda or in a future agenda into next year as the sunset process progresses, then that is something that the board can decide to do, is have it on the agenda to discuss.
So it means
And
that,
I'll
this
just
is,
add,
oh, go ahead, Nancy.
Well, typically, as Rick said, this letter is addressed to the chairs of the two committees. And so, well, the board would not necessarily bring these issues up because they're coming from professional associations. It is something that the committees could ask the board to address either at our hearing or in our response to what they call their background paper and issues for us to specifically respond to after they've reviewed everything. It's kind of like what Carl Josephson just mentioned with the Structural Engineers Association and significant structures. 5 years ago, when we were doing Sunset Review, SEOC went to the committees and talked about the significant structures proposal, and our board said, this isn't something we've really considered yet. And so the committees directed the board to hold meetings and discuss the issue and then make a recommendation. And that we did the following year after sunset, and our recommendation was not to move forward with it at the time. So that could be what might happen with the letter from ACEC and CELSA, that the committees will ask the board to address certain aspects of it. And that would be something we would do at that time.
So I'm also wondering in that sense that that is, we can also take a more proactive approach and maybe to include some of those, in the emerging issues. Or I'm just, so I'm just
I
thinking
think
about maybe
one of the
different
issues
approach.
we have to look at is whether these are board issues that the board sees, or are these issues that professional associations see and are bringing up? Because that's the difference. This is our report to the Sunset Committee about things going on with the board.
Yeah, certainly not to diminish the validity of the concerns expressed in any public comment, including this letter. We have to always look at it from the board perspective. Is this affecting the board? And is it affecting the board being able to protect the public by its licensing and enforcement processes? Some of the things that are mentioned in public comment are related to enforcement processes. But it should be something that this board considers on whether or not it's a board issue and a board concern. Because that's what we're describing in this sunset report is board concerns, board issues, board situations.
Kobe?
So I just want to say that I agree with Ms. Wong. I mean, I think that some of these issues are, or there are certainly concerns of mine, especially the enforcement issues. I think there's a few other of these subjects that are probably worthy of hearing the perspective of staff on, and perhaps as a board making recommendations to the committees. And I know that some of these are hot and controversial, but I think anyone who has been on this board for a long time, or even a relatively short time, has seen that we do have issues with enforcement that need to be addressed one way or the other. And either with resources or with changes in the law or clarifications of the law. And seems to me that the timing is good to discuss these issues and to decide as a board whether or not we want to address them within the sunset process. I'd certainly be interested in President Hartley's views on some of these issues. But it seems to me we've got a November meeting, I think. That might be a good time.
So now you're seeing why we're requesting the December teleconference dates.
Yes.
Because things may come up.
Yeah.
It seems like it's been a very fast year trying to prepare for sunset. It's come upon us very quick. What I would suggest as you continue your discussion with this is that with any public comment you've heard today, not just this letter, if there's anything that you think rises to the level of a board concern, board issue, let me and the president know that you would like to have it on the agenda for November for us to discuss and how we want to address that in the sunset report, because it may be something we have to address between the November meeting and the December teleconference.
Good advice. Ms. Matheson?
Thank you. I had a concern that Rick just cleared up. I didn't think we should be discussing public comment on things that are not specifically on the agenda at this meeting, but put it on a future agenda if we want.
Well, push back a little bit on that. We're not deciding anything, but the sunset review process is on the agenda, and these are appropriate topics to discuss, it seems to me. I mean, we're just discussing what do we want to discuss.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring it up, and Rick provided the necessary guidance.
Yeah, to dovetail what Rick said, I think we're the board and we have the resources to follow up on many of these topics. And as Kobe said, we're here to discuss the major issues. And this is a very good letter. I think we should read it even more carefully. I mean, first page, mentions basically what we are supposed to follow up on as board members, our duty to the state and to the public. And yeah, I believe we should have staff look into the major topics before the end of the year. And this would be a great starting point.
If I may, also something Nancy mentioned. Another way to look at this is, if anything that arises in the last few board meetings, in public comment, including this board meeting that this board thinks should be addressed, one way to look at it is, should it be addressed right away by us in our sunset report? Kind of like the new issues that Nancy had brought up that we're suggesting that we make mention of, that the board is currently evaluating this. Not necessarily that we want to make change in this sunset cycle, but we are currently evaluating this to alert the committees and the public and let them know what we're working on. But is it something that we want to have at that level? Or is it something, knowing that these letters are going to the committee, knowing that the committees will have a background paper, will have questions back to this board through the legislative bill process next year, and this board has opportunities to discuss at that time, is it something that you would like to see? If the committee thinks it's important to discuss, that would give this board an opportunity to discuss it too. So you kind of have to weigh what you think is what level, because there may be other items that come up where other interested parties reach out to the committee in January, February, March, whatever, and say, hey, we'd like to see this happen too. That may come to this board. So you may not see everything or be aware of everything at this point. So it's just something to keep in mind too. Is it something you want to add in as the board? Then, being this is public comments, not agendized specifically, it's something you could bring up at the November meeting to talk about if you so wish, or it's something that you may want to see, let's see what happens, what the committee thinks with this, and then we can address it in response based on what the committee's questions are.
Okay. Any further board comments?
I love Rick Moore. I think, I disagree. I think we're being too reactive. I think the board has been dealing with these issues for years. It's time for us to proactively take a look at I'm particularly concerned with unlicensed practice among land surveyors. I think we all know that the laws have been attacked repeatedly, and that we probably need to take another look at whether or not they need to be tightened or changed or broadened. And I do also think that it's probably time to take another run at the issue that Carl raised, especially if we see other states around the West in particular that are adopting those kinds of laws. I don't necessarily think that we do have to include it in the sunset process, but I don't think we should wait to see whether the committee wants to ask us about these things. I think that we can take a more proactive view of a specific set of issues. We can decide whether or not we want to make it part of the sunset process or whether we want to deal with it next year as maybe a board-sponsored bill or something like that that's separate from the sunset process. I don't feel super strongly about that, and I do understand that staff might have concerns about trying to incorporate something really controversial into the sunset process. You know, here we are in October. I get that as well. That can be discussed, but I do think that it's our responsibility to take another look at these issues and to be more proactive about it than what our executive officer is suggesting. And I would ask that we agendize this for further discussion at the November meeting.
One last comment. I love Kobe King.
Period. Betsy was Betsy was first.
Just a point of clarification. I don't think Kobe's statement was a disagreement with Rick. I think it was a selection of one of the options that Rick presented.
Wilfredo?
So I'm not super familiar with the procedural activities we'd have to go through, but
First, you have to preface it with "I love somebody."
no, I love Kobe and Rick both. So I win. I mean, I agree that there are interesting topics here that I think we should explore and talk about whether we want to see some changes in here. I'd also like to kind of distinguish between things that to me read as in furtherance of public safety and the mission related to that versus protecting the, for lack of a better term, the industry that is land surveying specifically, which I think there's a little bit of both going on here. And I think that's also important to us, but maybe in a different way. And given that we're expecting to see more letters of this sort, I wouldn't want to rush through this process. So I don't know that like chaining ourselves to the sunset thing that's kind of already on a timeline is practical or wise. I think we should collect all of these letters and somehow figure out what the complete total of topics are, and then we can go through and decide which of these we want to explore on what kind of timeline, and not have it rush through or kind of tied to a deadline that's maybe feels a little arbitrary and not necessarily attached to the specific topics at hand. So I'd propose that we just continue to look through all of these things, and then I'm not sure what the right forum for deciding what the topics are, if that's an agenda meeting of its own. But to go through all of the letters and say, okay, well, these are 12 topics that could come up. Maybe we should try to pick off 3 of these next year and see if we can make progress or something.
I think it's a good suggestion. I'm not sure exactly how to agendize it, but we need to agendize it in some fashion for the November meeting. Rick, you and I have spoken about the technical advisory committees in the past. Is this in general something that would lend itself to the formation and review by attack or not?
There's a possibility. It depends on what direction the board wants to go. There's 1 or 2 of these items. Keep in mind, I got this at about 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon. So I'm reading it also as we speak. There are a couple items that depend on which direction the board goes. It may require some technical input from representatives of the profession, and being, in this case, if it's land surveying, you're the only one. There may be a time where the board may go, let's form a land surveyor technical advisory committee and take into account any technical aspects they would like to provide to the board. So I think initially, no, but it definitely could open the door.
Thank you.
So Rick, just clarification. So the technical advisory committee is different than that subcommittee that we formed last time with me and Ramin, with Guillermo. Yes.
Yes. In our board operating procedures, we also have technical advisory committee operating procedures, and they serve at the benefit of the board when there's some kind of expertise that the board needs some kind of input in making their decisions on which way to go. So for example, the significant structures that Carl brought up, at that time we had, did we have a structural TAC? I think we had a structural
It
TAC.
was
We're on
both
the
the
board.
structural and the civil tax.
The structural and the civil TAC. We had them meet to discuss what actually would constitute, and I'm really making this sound basic. It's a lot more complex than this, but what would constitute a significant structure? They looked at what the other states had done and defined as a significant structure, and what they would define as a significant structure in California. So that's where the board relied on the tax to provide that technical expertise not to say what our language should say, should we provide language in statute, should we make changes in regulation? That's not their purpose, that's your purpose. But if there's any kind of technical aspects in that the board needs that input, that's what they're there for.
Yeah. Sorry, my thoughts weren't fully formed. It's just, because I see there's multiple approaches we could take. One is we can just say, like, put this letter on the agenda and say, like, let's talk about this set of topics next month. But given that we're expecting more of these possibly through spring, it sounds like, what I kind of want to avoid us getting spread too thin with trying to tackle all of the things that get listed, as opposed to maybe trying to prioritize some things that might come up over time. So like if we do the letters as they're received, we might like give priority to whoever got in first, as opposed to who raises the most pressing issues. So I just feel like it might be smart to kind of sit on it a little bit, collect all of these and like look at them in total and say like, well, here's some. On the flip side, like I wouldn't mind talking to these guys and have them try to maybe show up at a meeting and they can explain what they're thinking about these, so I can ask some questions. Because I know we got Michael here, who's a subject matter expert, but it wouldn't be terrible to have 3 or 4 of them here. So maybe that's just a thing you guys can think about, like a plan for how to attack this and approach it.
What I would suggest, given the discussion and how it's progressed and how much we love each other, that staff will continue to focus on what we need to do to get the sunset report ready in such a format that before the next board meeting, that the subcommittee has a chance to look at it and give us some feedback in time. And then we have that ready for the board members to discuss in November. There may be a few items from here that we could add to that strategic plan discussion to
Sunset report.
sunset. Sorry. Thank you. I've done that so many times lately. That add to the sunset discussion, to see which way the board wants to go. Do they want to include it in the sunset report at that time since they're discussing the draft? Or is it something they go, yes, this is an important topic, but let's address it separately from the sunset. At least we can discuss that. That's what I would suggest the board consider in November.
Ollie?
The first item, I was in that structural tag when we were discussing, I was the structural tag. When we were discussing the significant, I was the technical advisory committee. The second one is, oh, you wanted to say something? The second one is, and that didn't happen, I think, because PEG was opposed to it. And a lot of firm were opposed to it because they didn't want their engineer to be forced to have a SC license, but it was another try this time. The other one is, can we add continuing education that we discussed several times to sunset or no?
As mentioned earlier, we're going to already, that was one of our suggestions, is that we're already going to mention that the board is in the early stages of discussing continuing education, the feasibility of that. Looking at this public comment, that is one of the items that came up in public comment. Carl mentioned public comment unofficially to me this morning when he walked in. All the professional societies, since the board has brought this up, any chance they can mention it. So it's already going to be addressed to some degree in the sunset, but what we're not suggesting at this time, unless you direct otherwise, we're not suggesting that we tell the sunset committee that the board wants to implement it because we haven't fully studied it yet. If that makes sense?
Yes, thanks.
Any other comments from the board? Comments from the public?
I love you all, by the way, especially Rick and Kobe. Just to reiterate what Ali said, Ali was there at the TAC that we had that last time. I was there too. And we actually made some really good progress in terms of the definitions of significant structures. There was some kickback from, what has been implemented in Oregon and Washington, but I thought we actually made good progress. The position that this board took after that was all over was there was no legislation that was introduced, and so they didn't want to take a position if there was no legislation introduced. I guess what I would like to see is, in my heart of hearts, is if the board would at least say, we think that this is an interesting idea, it should be explored, or even better, that, we think it's a good idea and we ought to look into it a little bit closer. Just saying that, well, there's no legislation introduced, so we don't want to take a position. I mean, I understand that, but I'd like something a little bit stronger from the board.
So I have a follow-up to that. Is the organization you're representing considering legislation in that again? Okay.
Any other public comment? Nothing in the room. How about online?
We are now accepting public comment online. If you would like to make a comment, tap that hand button at the bottom of the screen. To raise a hand, dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand. Everyone may also type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Let's take just a few seconds to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request, do you wish to continue with the agenda?
Yes, back to item 6.
Okay, thanks for taking that out of order. Gonna leave the meeting now.
Thank you, Nancy.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Nancy. I love you too.
Hello, board members. My name is Tiffany Criswell. I'm the Enforcement Program Manager, and you'll find statistics, starting on page 129, and I welcome comments or questions.
Mr. President, I do have a question.
Yes, sir.
So looking at the first 3 pages of the report, and obviously this has been going on for a while, but one of the things I notice is that in particular over the last year, and even to some extent over the last 3 years, the red bars are significantly higher than the blue bars. And I think that if you look at page 76, you'll see that some of the days are creeping up. And if you look at page 77 in particular, if you go toward the am I looking at the, I'm looking at the wrong, I'm sorry. I am totally looking at the wrong, looking at a previous, I was looking at something from a few years ago because I was very curious as to what our months in reserve was back in 2019. It was significantly higher, by the way. All right, so yes. So going to page, 129, 130, and 131, you'll see the red bars are really higher than the, pretty consistently, than the blue bars. The days are creeping up. And if you go to the bottom of page 131, the number of the aging is just really moving up, and it's something that I haven't really focused on. But we a number of years ago were pretty concerned about aging, and the board and staff made a really significant effort to try to close out a lot of these complaints, and did a really good job of getting the aging down. And it just seems to me that, I mean, going from 275 to, over 360 now is a pretty big jump. And I'm just wondering kind of what your views are on that and how we can get things going back in a better direction.
That was an expected comment / question. So I think there's a couple issues really, and I've addressed it before. Connect has definitely added to the number of complaints we're receiving and opening, which you can definitely see over the last few fiscal years. We've been pretty inundated, both with cases we've opened and also general intake overall has been remarkably increased. So it is sort of taxing the workload a little bit. Intake itself is a lot more labor intensive. Everything from, in today's Twitterverse, complaints aren't necessarily fleshed out very well. So it's taking a little more time to understand what allegations are. We dealt with some, we're still working out some tweaks in the actual Connect process, problems with providing documentation, certain unsupported file types, insufficient information. We've got anonymous complainants in a much larger audience of doing that, and they are sometimes insufficient. So they're just sort of throwing information out, and we're sort of expected to understand that off the cuff. So that said, we're kind of working through some workload issues. I will say another, while we got our newest analyst trained, and she's doing a really great job, we also just experienced a bittersweet moment of one of my most reliable and hardworking and successful employees took advantage of a promotional opportunity and actually started yesterday with a new board. So we're so we're also working through a little of that, some growing pains as well. I definitely see your concerns, and I do think some changes need to be made. I will say one of our larger numbers, we do have a rather large singular project case that we are experiencing a high number of complainants, and won't say more about that, but it is a large project with increased activity in the open complaints there. So with the accessibility of Connect, which I find really great that we are getting more access by the public, it is going to cause the increase in numbers. And I don't see that going down. I think the numbers themselves are going to stay up, if not get higher. So it'll be a matter of whether we can get quickly through an early intake process and opening so that we don't see it age further. Whether that means we need to consider additional staffing, I don't know that we'll know just yet. But I echo your concerns. Thank you.
So have we made it, have we just made it too easy to file a complaint?
I'm not going to use the term too easy. It is easy. It is very simple. And I think when you make things very accessible and simple, I think the thoughtfulness in preparation, I think like anything else, I think we've seen it in general in our lives in general, how easy things are, how responsive we are in, I call it the Twitterverse, the social media approach where, you get a sentence. We used to see old-fashioned complaint forms where, someone took, I think, more thought in the preparation and the narrative of the complaint. More full sets of documents were received at the very beginning. Now we're having to elicit that a little more from the complainants, maybe thinking they didn't need to submit everything all at once. I think it's just kind of a natural consequence that I want us to be accessible and make it simple. But I believe it has caused maybe a little quicker reaction and maybe not as much thought into the preparation and submittal. I will say this is also now pretty much free for the complainants. In the past, they were having to pay to produce documentation, plans, and maps.
Just reproduction costs?
We've now reproduction costs, mailing costs. So I am pleased that we've made it simpler for the public, but it's just kind of a natural consequence to it is, I saw it happen in the application process, honestly. Back from when I was evaluating in the licensing unit, we've made it so easy that I don't know how, I think some of the completion aspect has been diminished a little bit on all of that. So it's kind of something we're just going to sort of have to face.
So if there are insufficient documents provided for you to be able to just vet it in the beginning, is the board having to do some of the work in putting that stuff together, or is it just a matter of the board needing to reconnect and request more and request more? Are we doing the work for them, or is it just costing us more work? Did that make
Both.
sense? Okay.
Both. And I'll use the anonymous complainant as an example. We're just getting the information sort of thrown at us, sometimes without sufficient documentation. And it's sufficient in that we find it warrants reviewing and investigating, because that's our approach. If we have sufficient information, it's our policy to open and investigate. That's our duty. But we're not given necessarily the documentation that we might have gotten on the outset that allows us to easily get that assigned and get that moving and reviewed quicker. We do have to go back to them often, the complainants, to ask them for additional information we know exists. And that takes time. I mean, so it's, like I said, it's just sort of, it's lengthening the intake period alone. I think that's what I'm seeing as the larger part of that. And then the overall numbers are increasing because we are getting a substantial more amount of complaint investigations through Connect.
Is there anything that we can do? Is there anything that you need or that your staff would like to change to allow you to have a more seamless workflow?
I mean, we're trying to, I will say that we're still working with Connect and the developers in terms of the receipt of documentation and how we can navigate the back office use. We still are waiting for some of the developments on the back office side of things. And I think that'll help with file management for the staffing. Right now, that's still a little far out, I think, in development. That will be, to me, I think will help a little more too on the back office side, so that the staff can sort of not have to rely so much on coordinating all the electronic documentation and the back and forth and communication with parties. So I think that's going to help. At the moment, I'm thinking it's just going to take a little bit of time to maybe reevaluate even how we process sort of through intake. And then some of the old issues that continue, D of I, the potential for them to forward things for criminal matters, that's always going to be a challenge for us. But I know, D of I continues to want to improve their processes as well. So some of the more longer aging cases are still, with D of I. And we've had to utilize them even just for looking to contact individuals or unlicensed individuals that are, with all of the online web activity, online unlicensed.
Yeah.
They're getting harder and harder to locate. And so we're having to use D of I to assist with that.
Okay. Guillermo?
Yep, just have two questions. Page 132, the complaint investigation phase and the outcome. It looks like over the last 3-4 fiscal years, about half of them resulted in a site or an FDA. Just trying to figure out if that was before we installed the new Connect system. Was that about what we were doing, 50% that ended up in a site or FDA, or has that number been lowered because we're getting more complaints that aren't going into that method?
Actually, no, those percentages have been largely consistent historically.
Okay.
I find it interesting that regardless of the number of complaints we investigate, that's pretty consistent.
Okay.
I find that to be an interesting representation of how we find the severity or gravity of the violations that we determine exist.
But we-
or no violations. It's pretty representative even beyond the fiscal years you show listed.
Okay.
It's been
And
pretty
so-
consistent.
So the numbers went up for overall complaints due to the new online system, but the percentage stayed the same. So that means there are overall more sites every year because the percentage is higher of a larger number.
Right, the percentages
yeah.
are maintaining, the overall numbers can be
Okay.
increasing, but the percentages alone have been pretty consistent all historically. I think that's an interesting.
Interesting. Yeah.
So does that, if I can just piggyback on that, I mean, does that mean from your perspective, and you tell me if you agree with this, that while the Connect system has made it easier to file complaints, it really hasn't changed the nature of the complaints themselves? You've got still, consistent percentages as to how they get dealt with. I mean, to me, I mean, look, having a lot more complaints is certainly an administrative burden, but it seems to me that it's a good thing. And if we're not seeing, because the percentages remain consistent, we're not seeing a lot more, frivolous, for lack of a better word, complaints. It just means that it's easier. I mean, to me, that sounds like it's a good thing for public protection. If the percentages are actually staying consistent, even as the volume goes up, which means that,
Mhm.
if you can't, if the improvements are, if there are limits to the improvements that you can do from a workflow perspective, it sounds to me like you're going to need more staff.
Yeah, I mean, and to your comment about the percentages, I think there's a balance. I think we are receiving increase in those that we have insufficient evidence on, or that maybe were, not a violation. We get a lot of completely irrelevant ones. Complaints against the founder of a particular social media page because their account was blocked. I don't know. I don't know how we come to the top of that. But we will also have an increase in those that establish violations. So, but I think the balance, and like Guillermo pointed out, the balance is still there in the percentages. So, and that's satisfactory to me. But yeah, I think we're just going to have to see if that's going to merit adding staffing positions.
I have another question. Would having more subject matter experts, licensees willing to help, would that help you?
So we actually put out to all of the subscribers, and I'm certain every single one of you is a subscriber, and should have probably gotten the email that we are searching for experts, and we did receive a marked amount of interest from experts. So hopefully we'll be able to contract that more. So yeah, we did that. We put it out on the webpage itself recently, but I think it was definitely the email to the subscribers that they noticed, and we are getting some contact from licensees to serve as experts. But yes, that's a bottleneck for us, is to find experts that do have the time and interest to help us out.
Is the rate of pay been reviewed, and has it been adjusted for inflation? I've just heard over the years that it's not a lot of money per hour, and I wonder if an increase might also increase the amount of interest.
Well, it's been it was increased to, it was $75 forever. And then we had increased it a few years back to $90 for regular review, and then $110 at such time as the case is referred to the Office of the Attorney General. I think it's important to note that we ask our licensees to remember that they're serving the public, that they are operating in the interests of the consumer and the public at large. So, I mean, I don't want to go so far as to say they're donating their time, but that's largely what this is. And it also is clear, and it comes up in hearing when they are asked how much they're being paid. It's very difficult to appear as if we are purchasing their opinion to be on, quote, our side. So I think that makes a difference, that it's demonstrating that our licensees are here to help the public.
Okay.
So I don't know about any potential increase in that anytime soon.
Okay.
I'd like to add to that part about the fee increase. As Tiffany mentioned, it was several years ago, probably 4 or 5 years ago, we had a long, lengthy discussion at the board level about what would be an appropriate fee. And we did raise the fees. I say it's fees, it's not fees, what we pay for the experts, both for an exam development purposes and enforcement assistance for Tiffany's group. We settled on some new fees. It did not make a difference in the number of volunteers at all. So I don't know if that would really impact anything. I think it's more about whether the volunteers are busy in their own work or not, and whether they're available. So that's something. Also, in that consideration, keep in mind that any expert consultants we have are under a contract. And that contract specifies what the hourly rate is for the type of work they're doing, up to a maximum amount. And other than less than a handful of those experts out of the hundreds we have, most of them don't come anywhere near the overall total of that contract over that 3-year period. So what we pay them, I don't believe is having any impact on that. It's the availability of the number of experts, both in terms of expertise that Tiffany's group needs or just availability of their time. That's the biggest issue.
Christina?
So Tiffany, want to go a different route. So page 133. So the two bottom graphs, the average days between the dates of issuance, of citation, and the complaint and investigation. So the FY 23-24 are very high. So is that a typo or not? Then what is the explanation?
So when we're only a couple months into the new fiscal year, I don't find that number to be very representative, except to say that there may be a couple really old cases I mean, that's actually, it's frustrating to see the high number. It's early in the year, so you're balancing, you could have some couple really old cases to, newer cases, and that number is just going to skew that. We are finding an increase in requests for hearing on appeal for our citations. So that's going to affect some of those numbers. So that could have been maybe a hearing that was completed after a number of time once it was referred over for appeal. You can have continuances, you can hold those, and they can take quite some time to adjudicate. So earlier in the fiscal year, I really just kind of take it at face value at that point and see if that starts to average out better as we go through the fiscal year.
Actually, a positive and shows we got some old cases taken care of, and it just happens to be the timing. It was July 2nd instead of June 26th.
Yeah.
Any other comments? Comments from the public? Please.
Good morning. Alan Escarda, representing professional engineers in California government. Just wanted to mention, I saw that you were requesting volunteers as subject matter experts. In our last quarterly meeting a couple weeks ago, I put that out to our membership, and a retired guy did come up and say he was really interested in volunteering. So I'll make sure he can contact you.
Thank you.
But if you're willing, if you could write me a paragraph for public workers, sort of emphasizing public duty. I saw it was on your website, but if you could tailor it to public employees, I can ensure that it goes out to 14,000 engineers, geologists, and land surveyors.
I do have to say that we are unable to contract with state employees.
Oh, so they can't volunteer though?
When we went to the new expert consultant contract process 10 years ago, that was one of the discussions that all the boards had with DCA Legal, was even if they volunteer their time, they're not allowed to do that.
Well, I'll
It's
have to-
it's about contracting with your employer.
Gotcha. So unfortunately, then I'll have to contact that person and tell them to stand down, I guess, huh?
If he's retired, he's no longer a state employee, he could serve.
Sure.
Okay, that brings my other point. We have a large group of retired people and we have their email list. I'm one of them. I can make sure that goes out because those are the groups that would have time and inclination to volunteer. So that's good news.
Yeah, and we have the link right on our main page
Okay.
for them to go into there and review what we ask and the forms to do that. We'd appreciate it.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Any online public comments?
We are accepting public comments online for enforcement. If you'd like to make a comment, please type the word comment in the Q&A box. Or better yet, tap that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users, dial *3 to raise your hand. And we will call on people in the order we have requests. Looking around, I don't see any requests for public comment.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany.
Hey, Mike, I think exams licensing, we could tackle that before lunch, before you break for lunch. And if the board wants to, we could even probably tackle strategic plan discussion before lunch, but definitely exams licensing, item 7.
Okay.
So on page 142 of your meeting materials, these are the statistics for the first half of 2023 for our candidates, both in terms of California exams, which we generally, the ones we show the statistics on. And since this was the first time with the ASBOG going to computer-based testing, ASBOG being our national geology exams, we're also showing those statistics. This is something we do twice a year. So we wanted to give you the idea of the statistics for the first half. If there's any questions the board has. I know you guys have already read through all these numbers and evaluated.
I actually did. And most of the numbers, the latest stats are in line generally with the last 5 years, but 3 kind of popped out at me. California Land Surveyor, by far highest, well, not by far, but the highest in the 5 years of pass rate. And ASBOG Fundamentals of Geology and Geologist California specific, lowest pass rate in the 5 years presented. Any comment on any of that?
I noticed the one about the land surveyor one. We're very pleased with the higher pass rate. We're also seeing a higher volume of applications and a higher volume of people sitting for the exams again, which is kind of mirroring what NCWS is seeing for the national surveying exams. So that is a very good positive for all of us. We're seeing that. As far as the pass rates, we feel that 2 things are happening. The outreach by Dallas Sweeney, our staff land surveyor registrar, about focus on the test plan specifications, know what's on the exam so you're ready for it. I think that's helping. I think people are dialing into that. I think people are now more prepared to sit for the exams. So I think that's good. As far as the ASBOG being a little lower, I attribute that whenever there's a major change in the way an exam is either developed or administered, you'll see a change like this. This is the first CBT, computer-based tested administration for the fundamentals and the practice of geology for ASBOG. So you're going to see that a little bit. It's funny that it only affected the fundamentals more so than the practice ones, but I think that's because they're already further along so far in the career pipeline and they're a little bit more ready to be licensed. The California specific, I think it more has to do with the change in the test plan specifications that have occurred more than anything. That's the most recent change there again.
Christina?
So I have two questions for Rick. So one is about the, whether the ASBOC or NCAAS publish their average passing rates. I know sometimes, they might be confidential, but, I think it will be very interesting to compare, how the California test takers, how they perform compared to the national. That's one question. And the other question is that I think these are wonderful data, and whether we have any access to it to further analyze what, who those people are, because the train of thought really is in relating to, the whole trend of addressing the diversity, the equity, and the inclusion. So, so who they are, whether they are the underrepresented, underserved, or underrepresented, groups, female, male, that kind of stuff. I think that would be just really valuable information. But, just see what your thoughts are.
Okay, so I'll address the easy question first. The easy question is NCAAS does publish their average pass rates annually in their publications, but then we have access to the pass rates from an overall national and for our board, or at least the candidates assigned to our board. So we regularly monitor that, and our staff registrars, when they're doing outreach, they'll talk about that a lot. So that is something that if you wish, I could show you that in the future agenda. I'll work with Larry to show you that information. ASBOG, I don't know, honestly don't know if they publish it in the same way. I know they don't publish it in the same way. I'm not sure exactly how they publish it, if anything. It's something I can look into. I do keep track of our pass rates for our candidates in terms of what's happening. But I don't have access to exactly the same type of information that NCAAS provides to us. As far as looking back and analyzing the people who passed or didn't pass, we only have the information they provided to us at the time of their application. So we can't look into it any further than that without manually profiling and Googling people. And I don't really think we should be doing that. But we basically, what we do is we consider them, if their application has been approved, then they're all at that minimum level of education and experience, and that's the target for the exam specifications. So I wish I had a better answer for you there, but that's really all we have.
No, you gave me, that explanation, just coming from, the point of view that, they have data, and how do we tap into it, and then providing another angle, to look at the whole diversity issues. And I think it's very valuable, to look at the workforce and whatnot.
Now, one thing I will add to that is Betsy will be representing this board at the ASBOG meeting in November, right? I think it's November, end of October. And Josh Goodwin, our staff geologist, will also be in attendance. I'll be doing it virtually. But that is something that if you want, we could ask Betsy and Josh to kind of informally discuss with the other member boards of ASBOG, or even ASBOG themselves, if they're interested, or if there's any information, more information available, if you'd like. There you go, Betsy. It's on you now.
I'm making a note.
I figured you already were. I'll pass it on to Josh too and let him know.
Any other board comments from the public?
Carl Josephson again, Structural Engineers Association of California. This month is the last paper and pencil version of the structural engineering exam. Beginning in April of next year, it will be CBT. Last month, there was a standard setting meeting in South Carolina to set the cut scores for the new computer-based testing breadth portion of the exam. So that went well. It's interesting that they can set the cut scores before the exam's even been taken, but that's the way it works at NCES. The cut scores for the depth portion, which will be given in April, that will take place in May of next year, and that will be after the exam is taken. And because they don't have the history and they don't have the depth of questions, that they're going to have to do a number of cut score meetings. At least the breadth portion is multiple choice, and they're going to be able to reuse a lot of the previous questions. So that's why they could do the cut score this time. 1,300 people are signed up for this last administration. That's about half vertical and half lateral, and roughly a third of those are from California. California is traditionally about a third of the structural exams.
Microphone.
What's that?
I was telling Ollie to use his microphone.
It's usually 400 to 500, so 1,300 is more than twice.
That's nationwide, I think.
Well, that's 400 take vertical, 400 take lateral, so it might be a total of 800. So it's about 1,300 this time.
So Carl, just so you know, for some of our exams, we established a cut score ahead of time also. Yeah, it's not, establishing a cut score is not a reflection of actual performance. It's a reflection of what would a minimally competent person score. Not all of our exams work that way, depending on the way it's delivered and developed. Excuse me? It's not a curve. It's definitely not a curve.
Any other public comments? How about online?
We are now open for public comment online. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of your screen. Dial-in users, dial *3 to raise a hand. People may also type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Jay, I see you have a comment. Hold on, we're going to give you an opportunity to speak. I'm sending you a request to unmute your microphone. All right, Jay, we're going to give you another request to unmute your microphone. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and read what is written, and hopefully that will suffice. The question is there a plan to improve the review time of PE, civil application? And that was our only request for comment.
Like me to address that?
Yes, please.
Okay. We're already seeing some improvement, Jay. I think it's Jay. As I mentioned earlier, we have historical numbers of PE applications, more specifically civil, over the last year and a half. We're starting to see those numbers come down. The last couple months, we're actually reviewing more applications than we are receiving new applications coming in. So we are making quite a bit of headway on that. So we're already seeing times start to reduce. I would expect that over the next few months we'll see even more representative of that. So we are definitely making some headway with that. So yes, that's a long answer to yes, we are seeing that.
Are there any other online
There
comments?
are no other requests for online comments. Do you wish to continue with the agenda?
Yes, please. Rick, how long do you think it'll take to go over? What's your guess on item 8?
It's just me talking, 5-10 minutes. Depending, the first item is just an update on what the Continuing Education Committee is working on. The other two items is action based on a task that you asked subcommittee of Wilfredo and Christina to do. So you have to agree on that and discuss if that language is important enough. You easily could go 20 minutes.
I think we should break for lunch. And we will convene back at 1:15.
I mean, the fact that you already discussed sunset, I think you went through the longest topic. So I think you're good if you break for lunch now.
Okay, let's do that. We'll be back at 1:15.